Hey, Mercedes here, and we're going to discuss about whether or not critical race theory is anti-white. There is a lot of debate going on Twitter over the last few days, and then American Greatness came out with an article, and I've been ruminating and thinking about it quite a bit, and I thought I would share my thoughts. Now, I'm sharing my thoughts not because I know everything, but because maybe I will share something that you haven't thought of or considered, or maybe you can tell me something that I haven't thought of or considered in the comments. Before I take off, can we acknowledge my t-shirt here? Yeah, I'm pretty stoked about this t-shirt. It's literally how to make my favorite sandwich. So. Now, I've discussed previously a little bit about critical race theory, specifically in my video where I discuss the math teacher Paul Rossi with Grace Church in New York, in Manhattan. I discuss about how the indoctrination of critical race theory in that school was pretty much the technique that was used was propaganda. If you check out my little card up here, you can watch that video. It goes specifically into that situation and about how these students were essentially being taught or programmed into feeling shame for their whiteness. And then that will kind of lead us into this particular topic about whether or not critical race theory is anti-white. Now, before I go full throttle into this video, was that even a word, full throttle into this video? I would suggest that maybe you subscribe, ring the bell so you get notifications as to when I post a brand new video, all right? So I first started seeing a whole lot of discussion because I follow Karl Rosenko. I always mispronounce her name, so forgive me. She has done a video. She popped up on the scene during the Trump presidency because she was a liberal that attended some Trump rallies and found the intolerance that was coming from the left that was really unsettling, and how welcoming the individuals were at the Trump rally. And I think she even did a video one time for PragerU sharing her thoughts on the entire experience. So I've been following her for a little bit. I don't follow her religiously or anything like that. She is definitely one of those walk away crossover, used to be a liberal, now kind of identifying with the Republican Party, and now she's like, I'm done. I think maybe she's identifying more with libertarian. I don't know. Who knows? But that's not important. That's not what we're discussing here. What I want to share with you instead is this debate about whether or not critical race theory is anti-white. Now, I'm going to share one of her tweets here that she did recently. She was getting into some really pretty heated debates on Twitter in regards to whether or not critical race theory is anti-white. And she's not the only one. There's a lot of people who have either been hesitant to label critical race theory as anti-white, or they say yes, but they include some caveats. And I'm not going to give you exactly my opinion yet until I kind of give you the entire rundown of how it went. I'm using her as the major example because she was the one that was showing up on my feed the most. And I would say that in the department of critical race theory is not anti-white. I think the term that she uses is anti-human. She's probably the most predominant or the loudest, at least over the last week or so. So one of the things that she shares, like, for example, every single one of you screaming critical race theory is anti-white is proving her correct. Congratulations, you have played into the left's hands yet again, and now they will use you all as useful idiots to paint every CRT opponent badly. You're going to kill the anti-CRT fight. And so this is specifically here where someone says, the name of the book is, quote, white fragility. So she is really, one of her biggest issues about it being identified as anti-white is that it can be used as a tool by white identitarian movements. So, and at its worst, like white supremacy movements. So she says in response to, so he wants you to be more anti-white than anti-CRT, kinda. She responds, almost. They want me to argue that CRT is anti-white because it's driving more young men to these white identitarian movements. It's dangerous, it's wrong, it's racist. I won't do it. Critical race theory is racist against everyone, full stop. And now, one of the largest or the biggest proponents or fighters against critical race theory is Karl Rosenko. He has been doing a lot of work. He is an attorney, also a journalist. He has been working with government agencies and with schools, with parents, with businesses, and kind of like to file cases against critical race theory. And so at one point he responded, so she says, the anti-white language is coming from white identitarians. White identitarians support critical race theory. They win every single time when you call it anti-white. CRT wins every single time you call it anti-white. People are seeing what I'm talking about now. Now she holds on to the response, or she considers herself, I guess, in essence, vindicated because Karl Rosenko, who is a major player in this movement, says that she is right about this. Critical race theory and white identitarianism are two sides of the same coin. They are both poison for our country and should be rejected. And I absolutely agree with that. So I have no problems there. The question here is critical race theory anti-white? Now, I'm not going to go into a big in-depth analysis as to what critical race theory is, and there's a lot of debate going on about what is being taught in the schools or in these businesses to executives is not critical race theory, because critical race theory is only taught as a legal or a principle in law schools, which I think is kind of a oversimplification. There's nothing to say that a theory or a principle that is taught in universities can't go through a process of laundering, so to speak, to then be spit out on the other side to be something that can be consumed easily by the general public. And that is what has happened here. Yes, a lot of people are kind of using everything and labeling everything as critical race theory, but there is a specific tie to that. There is a reason to that. There is a difference between teaching people, students, executives, your friends, whoever, having conversations about issues of race, about the history of slavery and Jim Crow and all of the policies that are usually cited as sources or reasons of systemic racism. And then there's a difference between having that discussion and then having a discussion about labeling the United States and essentially, by proxy, white individuals as inherently racist because the system that was initially created back in the late 1700s in the founding of, or, they'll argue even further back, 1619, is by white individuals for the purpose of propping themselves up. And that was really the only motivation, that these individuals were not motivated by individualism, religious freedom, or to be able to succeed as individuals regardless of their status, which is really what drove people from the UK over to America to establish eventually the United States of America. But that's like a whole discussion, and I'm getting a little sidetracked, which I have a tendency to do. Right now, I want to talk about Is critical race theory anti-white? And I have a few thoughts on this. I want to say yes and no. And it's not because a lot of times what's happened is, for example, for Carolyn and even Chris Rufo, she's staunchly like, this is not, we cannot say it's anti-white. And then Rufo says, yes, it is. But, it's also all of these things with the idea of it being anti-everyone or anti-human in general, because it negatively affects everybody. And if you think about it, that is true. It negatively affects white people because they are labeled the oppressor. They are labeled as, especially white men are put down all the way at the bottom of the oppression totem, so to speak, or pyramid. And the general, the values that were seen as core American values of individualism, having motive and gumption to establish yourself and make yourself successful. These things are being categorized almost as specifically traits of white people, and specifically the white man. And of course, white women get tied into that, but because they are subjugated in some way by white men, they aren't nearly as negative. But then at the same time, when you look at people of color, they are also negatively affected because they're seen as they have a victim status because they are the oppressed. However, I would argue that currently in this environment, that victim status gives you a sort of power or upper hand because of the environment that we are in right now. At any moment, anyone who gets a lot of people are very sensitive to being identified or labeled as racist or oppressor and are quick to pull back, to quiet themselves, to make themselves smaller or give up their space in order to let others in, which I think is almost, if someone were to step aside and just hand me something, hand me space, job, money, opportunity, simply because of the fact that I am a female, I would be, needless to say, pretty insulted by that. I would like to think that I can accomplish these things on my own merit. So yes, it negatively affects both parties. And also, a lot of times, another demographic that will be cited to will be the Asian community. However, the Asian community has an asterisk on it because it is their proximity to whiteness will be cited. So yes, maybe it's not specifically because they're white, because they're not, they're Asian, but it is the fact that if they have assimilated in any way in what is considered to be whiteness, that proximity to whiteness then invalidates their victim status. I almost feel like I may be incorrect, but I feel like the Asian community, in order to partake in this victim status or this oppression status, they almost need to vocalize more how they are being victimized in order to be considered that part, which is a very unhealthy space to be in, regardless, to be in this to have this ideology of critical race theory that forces you to kind of straddle these two spaces. And the thing is that at the end of the day, regardless of how you're looking at all of this, at its core, it is anti-white. Critical race theory at its core is anti-white. And the fact that she is, Carolyn, please forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your name, her hesitancy to use the term anti-white is because it emboldens white identitarianism. And I can totally understand that fear. However, if anything, I think this is yet another example of how toxic and how dangerous this idea of critical race theory is. It is completely different than teaching individuals about the history of the horrible things that the United States partook in over these hundreds of years in order to become the society that we are today. And there's no question that there are improvements to be made, but there's absolutely no question that we have made improvements, significant improvements. And right now, the goal of critical race theory is to completely tear everything down to its core, and then with the idea of rebuilding something. But the question is, there is no guarantee it will be better. And of course, there's no guarantee that it'll be worse, but the likelihood is there, considering that at its core, that destruction is brought by critical race theory, which has its roots in Marxism. And we all know, or many of us should know, the results of Marxist movements that have led to the death and persecution of millions of people. Now, to further emphasize on how I find that critical race theory is anti-white, in addition to being a negative for other communities and other groups of individuals, and I think, yes, it affects us negatively all as a society, but the main boogeyman, the main oppressor is white people. And I find it funny how a lot of leftists will try and use the argument that it's not that you're white, because of course you can't help that. It's the principles of whiteness. Yet for some reason, I find it kind of funny. It's this contortion and jumping through hoops of trying to separate the two. It's like what's happening with gender identity, separating sex and gender and having all these different definitions. It's very postmodern. It is one of these things that you just can't. It makes it very difficult to nail down. Do you understand what I'm saying? And that is on purpose, to create this unsettling sort of feeling. And this is what, again, is this strategy to try and separate being white from whiteness or white fragility or whatever other terms that they're using with the prefix of white. So I find it, and then you have to jump mentally through so many hoops to be able to separate that. And it just shows how disingenuous that attempt really is, in my opinion. Now, to give you a few examples of how it seems to be okay to attack someone simply because they are white. As I mentioned before, I did a video about the math professor at Grace Church in Manhattan, and how he felt like their white students, were feeling that they had to feel guilty because of their whiteness. And even the principal of the school was recorded and admitted that they were making their white students feel badly. So I did a whole video on that. I'll put a little card up here. Yes, up here, if you want to see that later. Then most recently, there was a psychiatrist that spoke at a lecture at Yale University. And she shared that how she fantasized about essentially murdering white people. And it got a little bit of traction, but it was really no big thing. I believe she's of Indian descent. Nobody really seemed to have been particularly bothered, but I do want to share with you this article on Barry Weiss's Substack. And as we know, I'm a fan. Where she shares, if you want to, you can go to this video and you can read specifically about this incident. And she has the recording right here of the entire thing. But she also has where she pulled a few quotes. Now, the one that I specifically mentioned is this quote right here, where she says, "I had fantasies of unloading a revolver into the head of any white person that got in my way, burying their body and wiping my bloody hands as I walked away, relatively guiltless, with a bounce in my step, like I did the world an effing favor." Now, here's the thing. She tries to, I think she did an explanation of how she was using that as an analogy. But if you listen to the recording, I wouldn't really necessarily agree with that statement. However, there are plenty other ones, even if that is an analogy. She says white people are out of their minds, and they have been for a long time. She says here, we need to remember that directly talking about race to white people is useless because they are at the wrong level of conversation. Addressing racism assumes that white people can see and process what we are talking about. They can't. That's why they sound demented. They don't even know they have a mask on. White people think it's their actual face. We need to get to know the mask. Needless to say, this is the flyer. You can listen to the entire thing here on Barry's Substack. I would highly recommend that you give it a listen. Another example was a few months ago, Lockheed Martin sent some of their executives over for a training. And Chris Rufo covered this. This is a Twitter thread here, but it was all done via Zoom, as you can see right here. The one that really stood out to me that I found very interesting was this. It says, white men as full diversity partners argues that the roots of white male culture include traits such as rugged individualism, a can-do attitude, hard work, operating from principles, and striving towards success, which are devastating to women and minorities. As you can see here, it goes through this entire measured moderation and silent strength, striving towards success and materialism, focus on status and rank over connection. So these are key white male culture characteristics, and they were being taught as they are negatives, because the idea is that the white male uses these things to dominate over others, as if others, like people of color, women, Latino, Black, Asian, whoever, are incapable of having that rugged individualism or a survivor mentality that focuses on the future. Only the white man, or predominantly, I'm not going to say only, predominantly the white man is capable of this. And by their mere status and their, use of whiteness, they are able to oppress others. So this is the issues that we have here. This is what critical race theory teaches. And this isn't something that is being accepted or used in only schools and businesses, corporations, and the such. This is now in our federal government. It's been in our federal government since the Biden administration came in, or shortly thereafter when he decided to really encourage it and push it. Not too long ago, there was a proposition put up for the Department of Education to specifically teach from Ibram X. Kendi and the 1619 Project, which is people will argue that it's not critical race theory, but it is definitely affiliated with critical race theory. Of that, there is no doubt. And even the Biden administration has used the small business relief plan does categorize, for example, Asians as a disadvantaged group, including, of course, Blacks, people of color, women, but you know who's not included in there are white men. So the Biden administration is, instead of just applying this relief to, in the sense of need, like whoever needs it and qualifies can receive it, they prioritize people depending on their race. And of course, white males have no priority, or I should say, prioritize them by their race or gender, and white males are not prioritized in any way. Which is interesting considering that even though Asians are prioritized, they on average be wealthier than white males. But it doesn't matter, they receive a priority. So there's no question that critical race theory is promoted not only by our schools and corporations, but also our government and even the military. And just recently, General Mark Milley testified. He is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he was testifying, I think he was responding to Representative Gates, who was questioning him on including books such as White Fragility and How to Be an Anti-Racist. I believe specifically at the U.S. Military Academy. And he defended that thought. He did dismiss, saying that he doesn't really fully understand what critical race theory is, but that he defended it because he believed that the military had to understand and comprehend these principles, these ideas. Now, here's the thing. I am not opposed to anybody, universities, schools. I don't know about elementary. I don't think elementary schools or high schools and stuff like that. It's a pretty complex subject to be getting into, but definitely universities, corporations, anybody who has an interest in learning about critical race theory as an idea, just as we would learn about communism and Marxism, is a fair thing. Now, that is completely different than teaching critical race theory as a principle. That is completely two different things. And that is what is happening today. It is not that we are learning about the principles or that it exists, and then that is actually important to learn, for example, like socialism, communism, Marxism, so you know when it's happening, you can identify it, and you can be like, you know what, this didn't end well, I don't know, a few dozen times. I should probably be weary of this and find a way to pump the brakes on it. Do you understand what I'm saying? So the same thing happens here with, it is important to understand critical race theory so you can identify it and then put it to an end. Now, to teach it in schools and indoctrinate it into our students, into our society, into our military or our law enforcement, that is bad. So, in summation, do I believe that critical race theory is anti-white? Essentially, yes, I do. I will say yes because that is its most common, regardless of who it is affecting. At its core, the principle is anti-white. It does affect all communities negatively. It affects our society negatively. And we cannot be fearful of the fact that white identitarianism may latch onto it and use it as an excuse. If anything, that is a further example, a tool that can be used to point out that critical race theory is bad. So that's all I have to say today. If you liked my content and you maybe want to see some more, I would suggest that you subscribe, you ring that bell, leave a comment, give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you don't agree with me. If anything I said here you absolutely don't agree with, then let me know in the comments. Is there something I didn't consider? Now, because my topics have a tendency to be a little not so friendly to the YouTube gods, I do back up all my content at locals.com. I am also developing some exclusive content over there. Right now, it's open and free to everyone. Once I start developing that exclusive content, there will be a small fee to see that and also to participate in the comments. Finally, if these are issues that are important to you and you are a woman and you hold the values of femininity, self-reliance, and freedom, I would suggest that you check out my website, libertasisters.com, a community of women where we share resources or ideas. We also support each other. Membership opens up for 30 people at a time. If you want to get notified, I would suggest that you join the email list, and also join the email list anyways, because sometimes I share some exclusive content through the email list too. So thanks for hanging out with me, and I will see you on the next video. Bye.